I'm going to use the word defensive, but that's not a strong enough word. It's like they're hiding behind this big, thick fortress of excuses. And if there is a problem, it's because I'm exposed to idiots like you. And so that's how they think and that's how they operate.
Most women don't stay in abusive relationships because they're naive, right? I think that most of the time we are sold a bit of a lie. He's just immature. He's still growing. He just doesn't understand, He'll change when he's older. He'll change later in life. But I think that there's a lot of men that are not confused, even if they are also immature. They're not unfinished. They rely on this feeling that we've all kind of adopted, that they're just immature. And I think that that is an effective way to gaslight. So I want to talk about how immaturity is related to this, but not necessarily the cause of abusiveness and certainly not the cause of narcissism. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Les Carter, and I am just so excited to have you on. And I just want to first kind of say, let's have you introduce yourself, and then let's get into this really important topic.
Well, it is an important topic. And Lisa, thanks so much for having me on. I've been doing this for a while. I'm in my 70s now and I'm retired. And, some of your viewers know that I have a YouTube channel called Surviving Narcissism. I'm not contributing new content to it, but we have about 1,400 or so videos on there on the channel. So we still have plenty of folks that come around and watch the videos. And, I finished my doctorate in 1980, probably before you were born. And so when I started out as a young therapist, I had a professor who had a lot of material on anger management. And so as a young therapist, what I did is I did a lot of anger management classes and seminars, and that's how I got going professionally. And I would do like 6 weeks at a time, and I'd do 6 a year. And so it kept me busy and kind of put me on the map, so to speak. And we'd have all sorts of people coming in. Some people were the ones who have the anger problems, and some were the ones who were dealing with the angry individuals. And as the years and decades went by, obviously I was learning more and more about my topic. I began realizing, when I'm talking about conflict and anger and tension, there's so many other subcategories that go along with that. And so many of those subcategories fit very tightly with the concept of narcissism. Angry individuals tend to be high controlling, and they tend to have low empathy. They tend to have an attitude of superiority. My way is the only way that matters in this moment, and don't you forget it. They tend to be manipulative and exploitive, et cetera, et cetera. And so I began morphing in some of my emphasis into understanding the narcissistic tendencies that we have. Because ultimately, when we look at narcissism, we're examining the dark side of the human condition. We all have what I refer to as the dual nature. There's a part of us that has the divine on the inside of us, and then there's a part of us that's capable of evil and negativity. And as we grow, we can struggle with both sides. And healthy individuals are honest with themselves about all of that. And healthy people can say, you know what, I do have some capabilities where I can be mean, or I can be caustic, or I can be inappropriate. And I need to tend to that. And I need to make sure that I understand why that's there and what drives that so that I can go into the better route. Part of the definition of an immature person is the unwillingness to self-examine. And like you say, it's not as though immaturity is their goal. It's part of it, but their lack of self-examination just allows them to have all sorts of maladaptive behaviors repeat, just over and over. And so many people that would come into my office and then that I would meet in seminars, et cetera, would say, yeah, and there's just, I just feel so bad about myself because I don't like the way I react. I don't like the way I respond. These people bring the worst out of me. And so it becomes this vicious cycle that people can wind up being stuck in, with the immature person being the one setting the pace.
They do tend to. I feel like immaturity learns, but abuse repeats. So somebody who's immature can grow, or if that's their only sort of issue, they can grow and they can learn, but abusiveness repeats. I think there's a benefit to being abusive. Learn that the hard way.
That's a great way to put it. Now, okay, I'm probably going to give you too much information on this, but going way back to the 50s and 60s, a group up at Harvard were trying to come up with a way to determine how a person might be a healthy individual. So they came up with what they called the 16 PF personality factors, 16 factors that were part of being a healthy person. And over time, they began narrowing it down, and more people began coming in and looking at their research, and they narrowed that down to 5 primary ingredients to watch for that tells us where a person is in their healthiness. And we refer to that as the OCEAN model, OCEAN. O is for openness, C is conscientious, E is extroversion, A is agreeableness, and N is neuroticism, where we can look at you and on those 5 different grids, and based on where you are on some of those, we can figure out, your level of personal maturity. The number 1 out of those 5 ingredients that tells us if you're a healthy person or not is your level of conscientiousness. It's the C. And to be conscientious, that's a very rich word, where you're tuned into other individuals, you make decisions based on other people who might be involved with you in those decisions. There's a sense of anticipation, there's a reliability, a responsibility, empathy is involved in your conscientiousness. And so when people have a very conscientious mindset, then usually those are individuals that are delightful to get along with, and you really care about them and they care about you, and you can have a lot of mutuality. But there are some individuals who their thinking is, well, conscientious. Well, I'm conscientious about how you treat me, so they misuse it, and so they don't like it. And so their immaturity, it's all about me all the time. It takes over, or they're just kind of, like you say, an autopilot. They just keep going back to it over and over. And that lack of conscientiousness has many, and when I say many, a whole lot of ramifications with respect to how relationships will play out.
Who do you think actually benefits, though, when we label it as immaturity only? I feel like the frame is always, he's traumatized, he's just immature. Are there choices that are happening as part of this?
Oh, yeah, there are choices. And keep in mind that narcissistic individuals are chronic victims. Like, look what you're doing to me now. And so if you want to say, well, you've got emotional issues, they'll either do one of 2 things. They'll flip it around on you. Me, what about you? Or if it's extremely obvious, if they've been screaming for hours, they might say something like, well, if you had to live with my old man, then maybe you wouldn't have it so easy yourself, And so they can make excuses about, people in their past or people in their presence, or the reason I get mad is because you're so unreasonable. They come up with all these excuses. So if we just say, well, I need to cut them some slack because maybe they're trying to figure things out, that narcissistic person, they're just going to take it and it's like, oh, good, I just bought a little bit more time with you. And if there is a problem, it's because I'm exposed to idiots like you. And so that's how they think and that's how they operate. And I'm sure that many people in our listening audience today can say, oh, yeah, I've been on the receiving end of all sorts of blame for things that emanate from that person that's so difficult, but somehow it's my fault. And in the narcissistic world, that's how it works.
Yeah. The DARVO is so destabilizing. It's like you're in the middle of a conversation and suddenly like, wait, how are you the victim? But accountability, I feel like they're allergic to accountability. Their whole function is, how can I blame someone else? How can I externalize what's really going on here? It's definitely not me. It's you.
Well, see, I go back to my original comment. We all have this dual nature. And, if you were to ask me, well, Les, have you ever been angry? And the answer is, yeah, I've been angry. Sometimes it can be very appropriate, and I really work hard to, you have to practice what you preach, but I really work hard to be appropriate with it. But then if I look into my personal history, it's like, I have had those moments, and when it just hasn't really played out right, and I frankly made a fool of myself, or I was inappropriate, or I think I stepped on someone's toes unnecessarily, then that healthy non-narcissistic person can say, I've got some soul searching to do. And that's that self-reflection. And, you can get someone that's really kind and helpful, and they can think, well, I'm here with you, and I'll work with you. And if you're struggling, then I'm right here by your side. Don't worry. And the narcissist thinking, I think I can work this in my favor. And so they might admit that there's a problem, but as soon as you step in and say, well, I can help you, then in their mind, they're thinking, yeah, you can help me by being a better version of you. And somehow it's your problem. And that lack of self-reflection shows up very quickly.
It always reminds me, so many victims and survivors are like, am I the problem? Am I the narcissist? If you're self-reflecting, probably not. That's not a common trait of
the way I
abusive.
tell when people ask that question, am I the problem? I'll say, well, your biggest problem is you don't think like a narcissist. You're trying to apply common sense, healthy qualities to a very unhealthy person. And unfortunately, in relationships, the unhealthy person tends to be the one that's most dominant.
Right. And that makes sense. And I mean, hello, that's why they've got the power in these relationships and why victims feel just completely helpless in this, how things get flipped and twisted. We seem to kind of see this as, emotional immaturity. Where does this sort of shift into fixed relational patterns, do you think?
Well, let's go to you just used a big word, the word power. Narcissistic people think in terms of power. Now, Lisa, if you and I were in a disagreement with each other and we were trying to talk it through, I would say, well, Lisa, here's what I was trying to convey. And you would say, well, this is what I had in mind and this is what I heard. And as we would talk with each other, there would be no one-upmanship. There would be no need to say, well, you're always making assumptions. You're so stupid. There would be no insults or anything of that nature. There would be a real healthy exchange. It's like, I hadn't thought of things from your vantage point before, but let me get some good thought to it, and let's see if we can move forward. And there would be a sense of collegiality. How hard is that? And the answer is, with some folks, it's darn near impossible. They can't do that because we go back to that word power. It's like, to them, relationships are an opportunity to establish power. Immature people, they're so hungry for validation. And they need to be the most special person in the room. They want people to regale them. They want people to say, yeah, you make sense. I don't, but you do. And so that's how they think. So they're constantly in a game of one-upmanship with you. And you can walk away thinking, well, did I do something wrong or have I offended this person? And my answer is, well, the biggest problem that you did is you showed up. All you have to do with some folks is just show up. And you're already on the low end of that totem pole.
Yeah, you're wrong. You're wrong. I feel like the feeling of being in a relationship with someone like this is just walk into it knowing that at any point you're wrong. They're right. They have the power. They know what's best. You don't.
You're not me, therefore.
Yeah, you're immediately lower. Like that's the superiority that's just right in your face.
And then in the meantime, when you try to talk to that person about, let's go back. We have a disagreement. Along with their power moves, I'm going to use the word defensive, but that's not a strong enough word. It's like they're hiding behind this big, thick fortress of excuses and all. They won't be able to receive input. If someone were to say, Les, I felt like you were insensitive in the way that you spoke to me, in my conscientiousness, I could think, well, that's certainly not the way I would want to come across. Help me understand what prompted you to make that interpretation. Okay, that's a fair way to respond to differences. Whereas if you say to a narcissist, I feel like you're being very insensitive, then in their defensives, it's like, well, let's see. That can't possibly be accurate because we're talking about me here, and you know how special I am. And they're constantly in that lie to themselves mode. And so it's like, well, no, I'm not the problem. You are, because don't you remember when you did that? And I told you this, and they'll just whittle away at your logic or your feelings or your interpretations, no empathy. And then you can walk away from that conversation thinking, well, I don't know. Every time I'm in this person's presence, I just feel like I'm doing something wrong. And the narcissist is thinking, that's exactly what I want you to think. Do not believe in yourself, believe in me. And then if you have to take the secondary position, that's probably necessary anyway. I'm doing you a favor. And it's sad that you can encounter people that think like that, but that's exactly their mindset.
You can't win. And I mean, I say you can't win. Listen, relationships are not about winning, but they are in a narcissistic relationship. So if you feel like you can't win and your goal wasn't really to win, I think that's a good indication that you're with somebody who's probably narcissistic.
Well, in fact, one of the goals that narcissists will have is they just want to wear you down. After a while, you think, I can't do anything to please this person. And then you can have this sense of fatigue and you can have your own bitterness and all. And then if you rise up and say something harsh in reverse, you might say to that narcissistic person, you are so impossible. I try to talk with you and all I get is all this blame and all. I hate it. And then the narcissist will come back and say, how can I possibly reason with somebody that comes at me like this? Gotcha. And so they love it when they wear you down and they get that reaction. And then you can walk away thinking, I fell into the trap again. And then many times you feel like I lose myself when I'm in the presence of that person. I can't afford to be me, because if I do say what I really think and feel, then I'm going to get in trouble anyway. It's curtains at that point. And so when you get to that point, the narcissist is thinking, well, it's a good thing you finally arrived at that logical conclusion. And they love it when they get you dysregulated. But part of their immaturity is such that they're not looking at this in a didactic way, back and forth, you and me. They're looking at relationships more in an authoritarian way. I know, you don't know. And so that's how they operate. That becomes their starting point.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And if that's the starting point, like there's no next steps. There's learn how to leave. I never tell people to just leave, because I know that makes it sound easy perhaps, but leaving is a privilege. But it's if you can, really, these relationships don't help us. They only serve to feed into their power, their need for dominance. It's crazy making. But I notice, there are abusive men that seem to be able to kind of name their childhood wounds and kind of circling into this, they're always the victim, right? My mom was mean, and using therapy language. And it's almost, in so many words, I don't think they would describe themselves as immature. However, it feeds into that. They just don't know better. They're just traumatized. They just had a difficult childhood. He's young. He's a man. What can you expect? Meanwhile, not all men. There's plenty of emotionally healthy men, but it all feeds into this. And I feel like they narrate their abuse using all of these excuses. But is it really immaturity that's driving this? They are benefiting from this?
Oh, it's immaturity, but it's a lot of other stuff too. It's exploitive, it's manipulative. One thing that a narcissist will virtually never, I know you're not supposed to use the word never, but virtually never will they admit how inept they actually feel. You think, I just mentioned, healthy people can have this exchange of thought and input with one another, and we can talk about it in an objective way. Narcissists, they get mad at you, they invalidate you, they can tell you how wrong you are and how you need to just shut up and do what they say. What they're in essence implying, although they'll never put this to words, is, I don't know how to handle difference. I don't know how to handle your uniqueness. I've never been trained in conflict management skills. Or if I did, I guess I must have fallen asleep during that particular lecture. And there's an ineptitude that they have. And so every time they insist, you have to be different. You've got to change your tune. You've got to feel differently. What they're really saying is, prop me up. Make me feel good about me, because I don't have the strength from the inside out to do that. Now, they can come across in a very strong, if we can say it that way, overbearing way, but actually it's a deep, deep attitude of weakness. Whenever something doesn't go according to my tight script, I fall apart. And I could give you one illustration after another, and we have people in politics and business and in families that just come across as this real strong-willed kind of person. But make no mistake, that's a little boy or little girl that's just scared to death. They don't know how to maneuver through life's predictable stresses and strains. So they just blame and they make other people responsible for their well-being.
Such a fragile sense of themselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard. I find, they do try to show insight. I don't think that it is insight, but they try to, I'm trying, I'm learning, I'll change, I swear. And they don't tend to actually change. I don't think they have the actual motivation to change, but they have motivation to convince you that they want to.
When I was in my counseling practice, I had a practice for 41 years. More often than not, the person who was on the receiving end of some sort of inappropriate behavior is the one that would first come into my office. But from time to time, that controlling narcissistic person would show up. And sometimes they would start out by saying, yeah, I know things didn't go very well, and I shouldn't have done that. And so, and then we can kind of get into some of the background in terms of the patterns of life they've been into. Maybe they have a history of disappointments with other previous relationships, or family of origin may not have given them the right ingredients, or something going on there. And we'll talk it through. And you feel like you're getting some good awareness going. But then something comes up a week or two later, I'll see them, and there's been this huge blow up. And when crisis or when tensions arise, they go right back into that pre-adolescent way of thinking that they're so accustomed to, and they react like a little kid. And all of that good insight and awareness just goes flying out the window. And it's like, well, what are those conversations we had? And, you want to be patient and all. But over time, you realize that their attempts to find insight is little more than window dressing with many of them. They want to look like they're trying to make adjustments, when in fact, when crunch time comes, it's like, nope, you're not going to see those adjustments there. And so it's aggravating. People ask me, can narcissists change? And the answer is, yeah, they can, but a very, very low percentage actually do, because the vast majority are so entrenched in that immaturity and their patterns of reactive abuse and all of that, a reaction that the adjustments just don't come in any kind of satisfactory way for any extended length of time.
I think that what I have seen in the few that have, quote, changed, and like major air quotes on that, there is a slightly higher sense of collaboration. But what I've heard, and directly from some of their mouths, is that it's really more of the behavior has changed because there's a benefit to the changed behavior for them. So it's still a little bit self-serving. But on the inside, they still think exactly the way you would think that a narcissist is thinking. They want to behave that way, but maybe they've got some benefit to themselves to shift the behavior, but not shift the thinking. So it takes a constant effort. So that's why I think the change doesn't last. You might be able to kind of dangle that in front of them to see some level of temporary change, like not getting their wife to leave them. But then what?
You're 100%, and they change their behavior, but not their thinking. Let me do a little dovetail here, okay? When I talk with people who are on the receiving end of this inappropriate behavior, I'm thinking, well, what you don't want to do is match pitch with that narcissistic person. In other words, if you're angry, I can get angry right back. If you're stubborn, I can be stubborn, and that kind of thing. But instead, you might want to ask, what is it in me that can be different, even as I listen to this person who probably won't ever be different? Now, one of the things that narcissists are known for is what I refer to as imperative thinking. Go back to your grammar school days and recall what an imperative sentence is. It's very declarative, cut and dried, black and white, do this, don't do that. And we have words in our vocabulary that are the imperative words: have to, must, can't, should, supposed to, ought to, got to, need to, had better. Narcissists like to talk with you about who you're supposed to be. The implication is, I don't really trust your reasoning, so why don't I just step in and save you from your sorry self, and then we're going to be just fine. And so they use a lot of this imperative communication. You can't say that, or you shouldn't have done this. Well, what you can do is you can throw your imperatives right back. Me, what about you? You shouldn't have spoken to me this way. Or you need to be better at this and less of that. Well, the opposite of imperative thinking is what we might refer to as freedom thinking. I have free will. And when someone says, Les, you're an idiot, and I think you're stupid too, and they're really angry, well, I'm free, and I can say the same things back. But A, I don't agree with what that person said, and B, I want to stand up for myself, but how am I going to do that? And freedom means I have the privilege to choose. And the last thing I need to do is to respond to their insults with my insults. If you want to insult me, you're free. You get to do that. I'm free too. And I just don't feel the need to go into that space. So if someone says, Les, you're an idiot, it's like, well, I'm sorry that that's the way that you think. If you'd like to talk that through, I'd be glad to. And then if they want to insult me more, it's like, well, I don't know that I really freely need to spend a whole lot of time with somebody that insults me a lot now, do I? And you can learn to be your own separate person and not get sucked in. That's easier said than done, but it becomes a mindset, just as you were implying just a minute ago.
Yeah, it really is. It's because, again, it's so easy to say, like, just ignore them or just leave or and none of these things are easy. But even if you are still in the relationship or can't leave now or can't leave for the foreseeable future. Surviving in it is a challenge, but it requires this ability to disconnect and sort of like, okay, well, that's what you think. I'm not debating reality. I'm not debating your view of me. I'm not debating what actually happened. And you just kind of, okay,
I had so
move
many
on.
people say, I've said 100 times to this person that they can't do this and they need to treat me better and blah, blah, blah. And my response to that individual is, well, do you think attempt number 101 is going to be the one that's going to break through? And they just usually chuckle like, no. It's like, well, let's try a different attack then. You can do it, up to 482 times if you like, and they're still going to have crummy responses. Or just like you were illustrating, I can see that you're angry, and I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't know that I need to stay here and be exposed to that anger. So I have other things that I need to be doing with my time. And then if they just want to keep making you feel ensnared or entrapped, then it's like, well, then if that's the way this relationship is going to work, we're going to have a very minimal relationship, if any at all. Because you see, I'm a free person and I can decide if I'm going to hang with this or not. And you can get your own definition of who you're going to be. Or even if you are in a relationship that you can't physically remove yourself from, you can freely choose what your better alternatives are going to be. We refer to it as your assertiveness, your boundaries. You define yourself for who you are, and you stick with it. And then notice my tone of voice. I feel no need to cram it down anyone else's throat. I don't need to plead or coax or convince. That does no good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to live my truth.
Yeah.
And if
they
you
seem
can
to
work
want
with
that
it,
reaction, though, right? They want to blow up.
they're desperate to have that hard reaction. But one of the worst things that you can do for a narcissist is keep your calm confidence. Calm confidence is a wonderful way to respond to that blathering, stubborn, condescending person. And it's like I've been around this enough to know that we have a trend going here. I don't think I'm going to be the one that's going to change this trend. You are what you are. I'm so sorry that you're in so much pain, that you have all this anger and hurt and bitterness, but I can't be the one that's going to change you. And I need to go ahead and live inside my healthy reality, whether you want to join me or not. And then I'm going to join up with people who have a much better understanding of what clean living looks like.
Yeah. And I want that for everybody that's in a relationship with somebody like this. I feel like, I work with women every day in my coaching practice, and I see so many women believe that he just lacks awareness. He just lacks the insight. So they send him to therapy. They tell him to read books or send him my videos, or probably yours too. Women increase their effort. But I think that teaches the abusive man that their harm is survivable, that that's okay. She'll forgive me. She'll keep explaining it away.
I have her doing it. That works for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's dangerous in my view, right? Like over-explaining doesn't actually build empathy. And we try to do that. Let me explain to you one more time why that hurt me and why that should make sense to you. And we keep going. Okay, let me try it a different way. And you use examples and say you were at work and you start, imagine this was your sister. We keep trying and trying. Our effort increases. But then the whole relationship seems to sort of, stabilize around her tolerance.
Well, and most people who just exactly what you described will say, we've been round and round on this kind of communication for so many times. And then at some point, it hits you like a ton of bricks. So why do I keep playing my role in that dysfunctional style? And that's the trauma bond. You're glued to that person via inappropriate behavior, and you're bonded to that person in a traumatic kind of way. And I've got multiple videos on trauma bonding, and it's what they want to do is they want to empty you of you and fill you with them. If you'll just live your life according to my way of doing it, and whenever we disagree, if I can get you to be inappropriate and yell and argue like that, then that gives me the smug permission to continue being who I am because you're such a dope. And so that's how they think. It's like, I see the game. I ain't playing that anymore.
You're so right. You just made me remember a conversation I had with Dr. George Simon, and he was like, the smugness. Yeah. Isn't George amazing? He talked about the smugness is just this horrible aspect. You don't see it in every person that's narcissistic, but the ones that are, it's just, And when they bait you, that's that look that we're all picturing on our spouse's face. That's that smug, I got you. I got you to be emotional. I got you to react or defend yourself.
Well, see, George Simon, he's an expert on the covert narcissist. And, some of these guys, they may not be, or women for that matter, they may not be as loud and out there. But over time, you just realize, man, that stubbornness and that criticism and that invalidation and their irritability and annoyance, their defensiveness, it just keeps coming back, doesn't it? And so, yeah, when you see the pattern, and what you can't afford to do is to play what I refer to as the hero role. I can't be your hero. I can't make your life better. That's coming from someplace inside of you that you're not letting me have access to. Only you can access that. And if you choose not to, then I'm just flailing at the wind. If I feel like I'm going to be the one that makes you grow, that has to come from you. And so many recovery programs start with the idea that you have to come to terms with your own brokenness. And the narcissist thinks, yeah, I've got brokenness. You're broken.
Yes.
As opposed to there's something inside of me. They don't go there.
An externalization of blame automatically. And women tend to internalize that, And I think that, again, that sort of increased effort that you see from women, and that I think stems from a lot of hope, right? Hope and fear, those drivers of a trauma bond. If we hope that it's just trauma, just immaturity, just that his mom was mean, just that he's avoidantly attached, all the rationalizations that we make about explaining their behavior, it can be coexisting. Those things can be true, and the abusive person is making a choice to be abusive because it benefits them. But it reinforces this dynamic, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Lisa, I've come up with a statistic. It's not hard science, but it's my years of dealing with human nature. I think about 20% of the general public tends to utilize reasonable, intuitive, reflective thinking on personal matters, about 20%. And I've got I won't get into it and bore you with all that, how I arrived at that, but I think I'm pretty accurate with it. Which means about 80% don't. You go to the grocery store and I torment myself sometimes with my people watching. Is this somebody that would converse well with me, or would they just throw up their defenses? And you look and say, there's just a lot of folks out there that just don't know or don't care to know what the mature way of life looks like. And some, if you say, hey, there's a different way that we can do this, then their response can be, I'd like to know. And usually those are the ones that already have a sense of curiosity and willingness to explore and look at new thoughts and ideas. But a whole lot of people, it's just like, no, that's not in my wheelhouse. I did a speaking engagement once, and they introduced me and said, this guy's written 14 books. And this one guy raised his hand. He says, I've never even read 14 books. And I'm thinking, well, he's like 50 years old. It's like, well, you got a lot of catching up to do. But what you just told me was, I don't like to think on a deep level. I'm not that curious. And these folks just don't want to go into that hard work of doing the self-reflection that we mentioned.
Yeah, I spent a decade trying to make someone reflective and to understand. And I was just so committed to truthfully, the immaturity piece was so personal to me. I was like, he's young. He just doesn't, like we were both young, but he just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. Let me explain it. Let me try. Let me, when he's older, when we do this, when we do that, I had all these plans for how it would get better when he wasn't immature anymore. But that's
where do culminate, do they?
No, never did. It didn't work out for me at all.
I mentioned there's another response style. I refer to it as the nonetheless response. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about the nonetheless response, let's suppose it's that hard to get along with person comes to me and says, I just think you're an idiot because you don't even know what you're talking about with this, that, and the other. And so I give my response and I say, well, the reason I did it was because of A, B, and C. And it made a lot of sense. I hope you can appreciate my thinking. And then if they come back and say, well, I just think that was the dumbest thing you've ever done. Okay, I'm being invited in this moment into an argument that I'm already the designated loser. And so rather than playing that role of the designated loser, when they just keep peppering me, I'm going to say, well, nonetheless, and then I repeat, here's what I was trying to accomplish. When they say, well, that's just stupid. I can't believe that you would do that. Well, nonetheless, that's the decision I made. And then they say, well, you just make all these terrible decisions. Well, nonetheless, I'm okay with what I've decided to do. At some point, it's like, it's your way of saying, I'm not getting sucked in if that's what you're trying to do. I'm not playing that game. The nonetheless approach. I'm comfortable with, and you have to learn to trust who you are so that you can stay out of that and use the nonetheless technique.
Yeah. My advice to so many women too that want him to go to therapy to grow up or learn communication skills and just learn how to be better, learn what his problem is, don't bother, because therapy does not tend to help this kind of person. You go to therapy. You strengthen your sense of self, strengthen what you need inside you to not allow yourself to be baited anymore and to be, actually hate the phrase stronger to imply that we're weak before, but just to really push through, learn how to trust yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, there'd be times when I would have couples that would come to my office and I would come to that realization. I've got one person willing to work and the other person willing to blame. And if all the efforts that I've got in my little bag of tricks just don't work, at some point I might just say, may I take some time just to talk with you separately? I think we might have a little bit more that we can accomplish. And that more narcissistic person, they might get a little bit insulted, but most of them feel like, oh, yeah, I got off the hook. You're gonna deal with the troubled person now, huh? So you think I'm okay. And let them think what they want. But sometimes it's like you're making a lot of good sense, but you'll notice that all of your efforts to get that good sense into that other person's brain are not working. Let's figure out what that means for you. And then we go from there. You have to individualize your efforts as opposed to thinking when we get to a place of good interaction, then we are going to be better. And sometimes it's like, well, when I get to the point where I have figured things out, then I'm going to be better. The relationship may not be what I want it to be, but I'm going to be the best version of myself despite that other person's inability to join me. And that may not be what you want. It may be more of a consolation prize, but it's a whole lot better than you just going down into the mud pit. The old, was it Mark Twain? Never wrestle with a pig because you'll get muddy and they enjoy it anyway.
Yeah. Yep. That's perfect. That is absolutely true. They rip you down into the dirt with them and then you're dirty and they're laughing, essentially, right? It's just, they love it.
They don't see the mud on themselves. They see it all over you.
Yeah. And then we feel awful, when I see my clients have reacted to abuse, and then they get dragged into this, like it's mutual or we're both bad, we're both toxic. And I'm like, no, we're having a human reaction. Like, what is a good reaction to being abused? At some point, you're going to be angry and yell or throw something, or like they can drive you to places that are so uncharacteristic.
Yeah.
If that's not who you are.
I so appreciate you saying that. When people come into my office like I'm Father Confessor and they'll say, well, we got in this bad argument. I said a bunch of words that I didn't want to say. And then I responded poorly. My response is, well, I've never known anyone who's responded extremely well when they're being abused. And so don't think of yourself as being an awful person if you say, yeah, I didn't respond too well with it. Well, we're not wired to be abused. I think we're wired to be loved and to be respected. So
rage is a natural reaction to abuse, among other things. Not always rage, but rage, sadness, tears, outbursts. And I'm not justifying, having that feeling. I mean, that's fine to leave, but it just makes sense to me.
Well, and speaking personally, I've gotten to where I just don't yell. I won't. If somebody wants to yell or if somebody wants to insult me, I'm thinking, wait a minute, I don't want to be an insulting person either. So if somebody wants to call me a name or just invalidate, I go back to, I'm a free person and I freely allow you to think whatever you want, but then I freely allow me to respond in what way makes sense to me. And screaming at the top of my lungs, that just doesn't work too well. That's an option, but it's not a good option. What would be my more calm options? And then let me go there. Yeah. And that's your healthiness, that's your boundaries, that's your assertiveness.
And I love that, right? It's staying true to who you really are. A nice little side effect of that is that I think it irritates somebody who's abusive and narcissistic, right? If you're trying to provoke me, best of luck, sir. That will not be happening. And then they're irritated. It's just a nice little side effect. Can't go wrong with that. Yeah, I love that. I think we need the hope to fall apart. We need all of the excuses and rationalizations that we make, right? They put little shreds of truth into this situation as sort of, my mom was mean, traumatized, and I just didn't know better. And all of that sprinkled in, we fill in the gaps and we assume that they want to do better, but don't know how to do better. And I think that while they might not know how, they don't want to learn how because there's no benefit to them. It's not just trauma and immaturity. So much of this is a choice. Like most abusive men, I don't think change because nothing ever costs them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've gone round and round. I've talked to colleagues and friends about, what is it about some individuals that just cannot and will not change? And I've kind of come to an informal conclusion that some people just have the gift of insight and others, they just don't have it. And the easiest way for me to, a good analogy, my wife, I tell her I love you most when you're singing. She was trained operatically. And and we go to a church where it's classical music. It's an Episcopal church. And so she likes to sing Mendelssohn and Rachmaninoff and all those people. And I mean, she's got this incredible voice and anything artistic she can do. Well, my musical skills starts and stops with, I know how to play the radio. I don't have that gift. She does, and I don't.
I love that you love her that way.
Well, yeah. And so I think that I have the gift of insight. I like when something happens, I like to think, what's behind the scenes on that? What am I not seeing that I might be able to pick up on? And I realize, well, other folks, though, it's not that they can't, it's just not in them. It's just like, it's the musicality is not in me. Insight is not into a whole lot of other individuals. And some folks, they've got it. They just need to have somebody help them learn how to, or teach them how to turn it on. But some folks, it's not there. And if that's that person in front of you, admit it, acknowledge it, and then realize, well, I'm going to take my insight and do the best that I can on my side of the street. And if the other person may eventually join me, that would be wonderful. And if not, then I'm not going to get into that mud pit.
Again, it's not as easy as a choice, but like choose to step out of that god-awful mud pit because it's not worth your sanity and giving up who you are and how you see yourself and the kind of person that you want to be. That's such good advice. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of this amazing wisdom. I know
Hey, Lisa, I appreciate you having me. I know you've got quite a following yourself on various platforms. And so my response is go get them. And, we need as many voices out there like yourself and me and many others that we would know and we know mutually to continue speaking this. Because there are people that say, I want to learn. I just need somebody to help me with the tools. And that's what we're here for. And so to your audience, thank you for being with us because I hope that you can learn and commit yourself to that personal growth. That's what we do this for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'll link, parts of your links to your books and all that and your channel. I know you're not running it anymore, but still check out all the videos. Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate you having me.